All right, what's up, everyone? Jake and Braden here with Selling Ourselves. We got to find a better name, bro, but
Yeah, we do.
we'll get to it. Just two dudes. We sell software, used to play baseball together, and now we're trying to document the best practices for sales and basically just wealth creation overall, I guess. So today's podcast is going to be about jumping into sales, starting a new role in sales. We're going to go through the pre-taking the job phase of what you should look for in a role, go through the first 3 months on the job, some tips and tricks that helped us go from SDR to AE in less than 6 months. And then we'll talk about, maybe the times that you should potentially think about leaving or jumping into the next role. Jake, excited to get into it.
Yeah, man. Should be a good one.
Yep. All right, Jake. So walk us through when you found your first job in sales. What was that process like for you? Did you fall into it? Did you actively seek it out? Give me a minute rundown of what that looked like.
Yeah, I think I'm part of the majority that never planned to be in sales and just fell into it. And just coincidentally, right place, right time, right company, and was able to scale myself up into an enterprise role within 2 years. And I think something that you and I have talked about is a few strategies that we've been able to map out and replicate. Obviously, you've seen success working with it, and I think it's something that other people can find benefit from for sure.
Totally. So you just kind of fell into it. Did you have somebody that was at the company and brought you in? You were referred. Like, what made you think that that was the right decision to go with, or what'd you look at before jumping into it?
I had a buddy that was inside the company, but I really didn't have another choice. It was a sink or swim scenario. I just I knew the one vehicle I could get into to have the most autonomy over my income and time was sales. And so I was already looking in that avenue, and then I just knew that the world was going in a tech direction and just happened to fall on too. And so I was already looking at tech sales, had applied to 3 or 4 tech sales company in St. George, and then picked one of them.
I like it. So sales was kind of the avenue you wanted to take, and then the actual company you ended up at was a right place, right time, knew the right people.
That's right. Yep.
All right, I love it. I had a little bit different experience, kind of similar though, with in terms of, right out of college, I took a job with a Fortune 500 company doing data analytics, something that I was good at. Didn't have a real desire for it, but did really well in school at it. Got an internship on just like a LinkedIn random application. Saw one of my friends work there, kind of got referred in. So kind of fell into that. And then, as you know, obviously, after 2 years of doing that, I realized that the competitiveness and the drive and the constant pursuit of learning that I had in baseball just was not present in my work life
Sure.
doing what I was doing. And so through a lot of conversations with you, I think those were some of the turning points for me of deciding that, hey, sales might be the right way for me to go. For a lot of the things you mentioned, autonomy over my time, the ability, infinite ceiling almost. Like you can make as much as you want to make. You can scale up pretty quickly. There's very few professions I think you can start out at 37.5K and then within a year, double, triple, quadruple that based on how you perform. I know you couldn't do that at my previous company.
No, and I mean, this is a little side topic, but I think it's the one industry other than running your own business or being an entrepreneur where you get out what you put in and being able to find different areas of leverage. And I'm going to butcher this and maybe you can help me, but it's defining leverage with the amount of input or the amount of output you get determined by the amount of input. And I think
Yep,
sales, and especially software sales, like is directly correlated with the things you put into it, has a direct correlation with what you get out. And so I think that's why you and I are so addicted to this, is because in baseball it was the same scenario. You you get out what you put in, and
yep,
it's the same with sales. And you have no one to blame but yourself if things aren't looking the way you want them to. And you can look directly at certain metrics of activity. And so it's just one of those industries.
for sure. Okay, so let's assume the listener right now, they're somebody in a similar spot we were. They know sales is where they want to go. They know they want autonomy over their time. They know they want to make a bunch of money and almost operate their own business in a way. What do they need to look for in a role? What should they do now to try and get a job in sales? And once they have interviews set up or have those things going for them, what should they do to make those happen, or what should they look for?
Yeah, so I think doing some company research obviously is a huge component as you're looking around. Some of the things to look at prior to even getting an interview is look at where the company is at right now in terms of revenue generation, if they've taken on any type of Series A, B, C funding. That's a huge component too, just to see if they're relying on outside sources to keep everything afloat. There's not a lot of stability in people that rely on outside funding to keep the lights on. So that's something to look at too. And then I think something that is overlooked, or I guess overlooked is the word there, is looking at the background of the leadership team. So one of the key indicators of a successful company is looking at the CEO and seeing, okay, like has this guy had success doing this in the past? Is this his sixth time trying to create a company? It just hasn't worked out. Um, so there's a lot of components there too. Of someone that I had heard was, if you have a CEO who has already done this, then that's a pretty good indicator that he already knows what he's doing. And so even looking at the CFO, what's his background, CTO, CRO, looking at where they came from. If the only thing they have is from internal escalation, they've been there for the last 20 years, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially earlier on, but it would just be something to maybe talk about in the interview process. Um, that would probably be the thing I would look at prior to even getting an interview as you're selecting what companies you'd want to work for, would just be the stability of the company and who's leading the helm.
I think that's some quality advice, and definitely not something I did jumping into
Nope,
it.
I didn't either. I wish somebody told me that.
So quality advice for sure. I think on top of that, I think even before we get there, one thing that I did and even could have done a better job of was just throw in, I mean, especially if you're entry level, may rephrase, like if you're applying for entry level positions and you haven't been in sales before, just throw as many applications at the wall as you can. There are so many people doing that I mean, that's just what you have to do. And if there are ways for you to stand out and ping the person on LinkedIn or find their email somewhere, send them an email, whatever, do whatever you can to get as many interviews as you can, and then do that further research, like you said, Jake. I think that will go a long way for people
Yeah, and
being.
maybe that's almost like a step two process too, like you said. I mean, first get your name out there, and then even if you have options, if you're fortunate to do so, and then
Yep.
almost do like a process of elimination of seeing where certain companies are at financially or
Yep. So it's interesting how this almost follows the exact sales process that prospects go through. Is you identify people that you want to reach out to, and you reach out to a ton of them, and then you kind of funnel down to having opportunities to speak with some people, and you do even further research and go from there. So it's interesting how the skills that you're going to use in getting an interview are going to be similar skills to the skills you're going to need on the job. So practice those, show that you have those skills, and you'll have more likelihood to actually get the job, get the interview, whatever it is.
yeah, and especially for people early on are looking to get an entry level job into a SaaS company, whether it's SDR or even like an SMB AE scenario. look at who your manager would be and even their background, because right out of the gate, your number one goal should be to learn as much as you possibly can. Because out of the gate, you're probably not going to be rolling in the dough, and that's okay because it would be unreasonable to think you should be.
You're probably
And
not going to be
so,
very good.
no, and it would be unreasonable to think you are good or will be good. And so, knowing you're probably going to suck, and then eventually you're going to suck less, and you'll suck less, and you'll eventually get better. Ideally, you want to build the foundation from a good manager and or team that can give you the right frameworks, give you the right scripts, strategies, habits, tactics of a high performer that you can replicate in your career. And so also something to keep in mind as you go through your search of who is your boss, who's going to be leading you, how open are they to up leveling you, and just a frame to keep is like early on in your career you should be working on up leveling yourself and accepting the fact that money will come, but the skills are stuff that they just will stack on top of each other.
For sure. You're in it to gain skills at this point. Not in it. You're not going to make money
No,
in entry level sales. You're going to make
no.
money when you acquire the skills needed to move up to the next level.
And I think where people might, I don't know how to frame this, but they think getting into software sales, there's a ton of money, they're going to start a job making six figures, and you very well could. Some people might just fall into something that's booming, just right. You know, you could be absolutely terrible at sales, but they might be working for a company that's in a starving crowd and just are selling things off the shelves. And so there's always that possibility, but assuming the majority, um, you have to be, and this is something that obviously I learned later on, but you have to be the person that is capable of earning and being in the position that you're wanting to be in. And so if you're a person that thinks you should be making six figures, it's okay, well, do you have the skill set? Do you have the character traits? Do you have the beliefs of a person that can do so? Or is that your ego talking? And so, like, the vehicle is obviously the most important thing, regardless of skills, literally anything. Because I saw a good analogy, and it was like, you could have the best burger with the best marketing, with the best fries, you name it. But if the other burger stand is in a starving crowd, they'll outsell you 10 times out of 10. And so I think the market's the most important thing, but then B, get yourself into a position where you can learn and have the opportunity to grow and develop as much as humanly possible.
For sure. I think a good analogy baseball wise for this is that has resonated for me recently is when you start out, like you don't know how to hit yet. You're not good at hitting. Like, do you want to jump into the World Series against Randy Johnson? You don't. I promise you. Like you don't want to hop. You don't want to be an enterprise AE right out of the gate.
No,
You don't want to hop on a meeting with a CXO and just get grilled because you're not ready for that. So that
no,
humble pie for sure, but I think that was a good analogy for me baseball wise of, hey man, you just barely picked up a bat. You've taken like 5 swings and now you want to go hit off of, an MLB All-Star?
right.
It takes time to get to that point. So jumping in, hey, we're in the interview now. I wrote down a couple of things I think we should somebody should ask about, or a couple of things I wish I would have asked about. You kind of hit on a couple of them. One being manager, like previous success, what's their background look like, and just asking the question of what their background looks like. Because if they have never done the role that you're doing, it's kind of a red flag for me. And then two, if they were doing the role, like there's a lot of context that you need to understand around that. And if they were doing the role if they were selling toilet paper in the middle of COVID, like odds are they probably don't have a ton of skills at selling. They were just in the right place at the right time. And so you're not going to learn a ton from that person, but just understanding the context around who your manager is, what their background is, what their skill set is, and how that can help you develop as a person. Is there anything else you were thinking about?
No, I think it's one I definitely should have thought about, hindsight 2020. The other one that I would think off right out of the gate would just be the success and attainment of the team that you're potentially going to join. I think something that you and I talk about a lot is like, what are you going to be walking into? Like, not only is it good to realize and understand who your boss is going to be and who's leading the helm and leading your team, but something that you have to understand is what are you walking into? Are you walking into a team that 1 out of 20 reps is hitting quota? Do you know what the quota is? Do you know why that quota is set the way it is? What your metric target is? Things that you're going to be asked to do to understand if it's reasonable, if it's attainable, something that might not be a super popular thing to do, but asking to see what their script is, what their cadence, or I'm sorry, what type of sequences they're running, and being able to almost do like an A/B test with other companies you're looking at, or if you have any prior knowledge to kind of see what their method is. Are they really bullish with their calls? Are they marketing driven? Do they have autonomy to write their own scripts? Just kind of getting the idea, or that will give you a general feel for the environment you're going to be working in.
For sure. And I think for people jumping into it, that first point you made that we've talked about is quota is a sales term that gets thrown around a lot that I don't think a ton of people outside sales really understand, or even a ton of people inside sales that are trying to hit quota understand. And we talked about this earlier today, but I came into it thinking that quota was the expected level that you were supposed to hit. Maybe it is at other companies, but essentially what I understand quota to be in sales now is above the forecast. So they forecast out revenue, or they forecast out what they hit last year or what they expect to hit this year, however they do that. And then they put 10 or 20% on top of that, and then that's your quota. And I didn't realize that at all. I thought quota was, hey, this is the baseline of people at our company. If you do better than them, you would be above quota. If you do worse than them, you're below quota.
100%.
And so OTE for me was like, oh, that's the minimum I'm going to make.
Right.
Like if I just show up, I'm making OTE. Like I'm going to make way over that. And that is not the case.
No, it is not the case. And that was a rude awakening for me as well. And that's also something to consider too, is these are probably more advanced questions to ask, but is what is the company's growth strategy? And so I think a customary theme, and I don't know if this is universally, but from what I've heard across multiple tech companies is they aim for 20% growth, which I think is, personally, that sounds like a lot, but if they can achieve 20% year over year, they follow this. And Jason Lemkin, he's the guy that founded SaaStr. He has this graph where once you hit like 50 million, then you're projected to hit 75 in 2 years, and there's a certain trend that is pretty dead to rights accurate. And so the way your quota is set is good to know, because are they following a 20% growth year over year? Are they trying to do these moonshot 25, or is it more conservative where they're playing the long game and they just aim for 10 to 15% and it's more just trying to hit quota and that actually is the expectation? I don't know. But it would be good to know like, what is the quota, but then also what is the realistic expectation of achievement. And that's
Yep.
something that took me years,
Yep.
apparently, to figure out.
For real, I think that's a good way to just condense it down is, hey, what is quota? What is the percent of attainment of the team over the past year? And that'll give you a much better feel of your OTE, or of the amount that you're actually going to make, because you could get an OTE of 300K and have another offer of an OTE of 200K, and based on quota attainment, based on how likely you are to hit that number, you might make more in the 200K job. Whereas a normal person like myself who's never been in sales would have looked at that and been like, oh, this is a way better opportunity with the 300K.
Yep.
So just keep that in mind. Quota is, or OTEs are easy to fib. We'll just say that. They're not necessarily what you're going to make. You need to have all of the information, which is what percent of the team hit quota last year, how are you forecasting out the next couple of years, and once you have that information, you should have a decent ability to project that for yourself. The third thing I would have asked about is how much do I get in terms of a training budget for my own personal training expenditures, because my manager's busy. My entire company is busy. They don't have time to sit on weekly one-on-one purely training calls with me. And when you start out, there is so much you need to learn, and you can't expect your manager to do that. And every company, I promise you, is going to say they have a training program, but
Yeah, I would err on the side of caution with
err
that.
on the side of caution for sure. And so ask about a training budget. That's what I wish I would have done. That's what I'll do in my next role is try and negotiate more of a training budget that I can use at my discretion, because I spend all day trying to figure this stuff out and researching things on LinkedIn and online and following people. My manager doesn't. And so the training I find is most likely going to be much more applicable to me, and I'm going to get way more out of it. So I'd rather me spend the $2,000 or whatever the budget is on training that I want. So that's one other thing I would have asked for.
Nailed it. Let's dive into, assuming you get the role, what are some of the key points that you would focus on early on?
I think you helped me a lot with this, obviously, with me starting out. You already had a good reputation at the company, and I was able to piggyback off of that a little bit. So if you already know somebody in the company, leverage their reputation and their connections. Hopefully they have a good reputation in the company. Hopefully. If they don't, go a different direction. But try and get big and early wins in a way that's easy for the people above you to see. And put time on the calendar with your future bosses. Like that was a great piece of advice of, hey, you're really going to want to get to know this guy because he's going to be your boss in the future.
100%.
And so that was some really, really quality advice.
Yeah, I like that. Get big wins early on, because not only does, and if you do it in conjunction with getting to know your bosses early, and I think this ties into the other point we had of selling yourself internally and almost multi-threading yourself.
Yep.
If you're in an enterprise, you're obviously scaling up the chain to get to a VP or a C-level approval to get sign off. The same thing goes for an interview process or a promotion. The more people you know up the chain and the more almost informal you are with them, the better your changes will be when the opportunity arises. So if and when a spot opens up, who's the first person that's going to come to mind? And so what I like about the get early wins is also promoting those wins or talking about those wins with these meetings with your future bosses. So even if you set up a monthly recurring meeting with your director or your VP, whatever it may be, being able to say like, hey, these are the things I'm working on. This is what I've been do so far. And then being open to asking advice or taking on recommendations for even how to double down or improve that. So now they see the current state of what you're working on, the process, the impact you've already been able to achieve. And now they see like, hey, this is what I'm wanting to do. Help me out. I mean, everyone loves to give advice. People like to feel important. And so
Yep.
if your director or VP or whoever isn't open to giving you advice on how to make the company better and make you better, then maybe you're not in the right position, which is something to consider. But be very vocal with your wins and use that as leverage to build a relationship and then get advice as well, because then
Yeah,
it's a win-win on both sides.
agreed. What you said at the start of that too is, I think, is really important. Of It's the same thing in, like you said, enterprise sales. When a VP or CIO or CXO makes a decision, they don't want to go out on a limb and make that decision by themselves. They want buy-in from everybody else around them. And it's the same thing when you get promoted up internally. Like when the person that's hiring for a role says, "Hey, I'm thinking about Braden," they want everyone else to say, "Oh, that's the right guy. That's exactly who you want." If there's any sort of hesitation of, I don't know, or are you sure that's the right guy? That's the last thing you want. So you really have to multi-thread all the way up and really preserve your personal brand in that way, because when that time does come, nobody's making those decisions by themselves in a vacuum.
Something I heard early on from one of my mentors internally was in the tech world, it's a pretty small community relatively. If you get to a stage, especially with the direction tech sales is going, with everything being on LinkedIn and everybody's on there as is, but your reputation precedes you internally and externally. Like your bosses have a wide network that spans out however long throughout the years they've been in the game. But if you're not doing what's required at your current job, if you're looking for a new role, and I mean the word travels fast, and so I would say obviously you don't want to suck at your job, but like your reputation and your brand is almost as important as the results you're putting out, would be my two
Yeah,
cents on that.
that was good advice to me when I started, was be really good at your job and have a really strong personal brand.
Yep.
And if you do those two things, you'll be all right. So to wrap us out, Jake, when should you start looking for new roles? Should you consider doing that?
Yeah, it's a good question. One thing I heard and was told, and I use as my frame, is when you feel you're at a stage where you're capped at the amount you can learn from your superiors, or your leadership is a better word for that. And so the time you feel, because there's never going to be a time, no matter what industry you're in, no matter what job you're in, where the job itself is going to be, you're going to feel a time where you know enough, because there's always going to be, every day there's going to be something new regardless of what you're in. But when you feel like you've learned everything you possibly could from your manager or your director, your VP, or your CRO, CEO, whatever, if you're lucky enough, and you feel like you've capped the learning potential there, is maybe a decent time to expand and grow and look for new areas, whether it's depending what your long-term vision is, but maybe it's like you jumping to a data analytics role, or maybe it's looking for a bigger company, or just going to a new company so you can learn from different people and see different perspectives and learn how to sell a different product and just be more versatile. But not saying that jumping ship every 2 years because you feel like you're bored. I think there's a difference between being bored and being capped on your certain job or your potential to grow as a person.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that's a good summary. If you feel like your learning has stagnated with the people around you, or you can't learn anymore from the people around you, might be a good time to look. But to your last point there, sometimes the leverage you've already built sometimes it's better to just continue going that direction. But if you're at a spot in your company where you can't go any higher and there's no additional leverage for you to pull out of the situation, and you're not learning, might be time to start looking.
Yeah, I agree. And something too is not always to be looking, but always hear people out. Whether you are actively looking for a new role, it's a good opportunity to practice your interview skills, to
Totally.
practice preparation for a new job if and when that time comes. Like it's interviewing is a perishable skill, and having a select this will be a totally different call, but you know, bringing these 3, 4, 5 things to the table each and every interview, if you can keep that skill set and be able to replicate it and even teach it, then that's a very important asset to have in your back pocket. And so, even with your current position, if anyone is ever in the job they have right now, like hear people out, listen to what they have to say. Maybe it is a great opportunity. If not, then it's all training.
Absolutely. All right, Jake. We'll round it out. Yeah, we'll go into all that good stuff. Interview processes. We'll get a little more tactical interviews in a future episode, but appreciate you taking the time. It's been a good one.
Yes, sir. We'll get the
All
next one.
right. See you, brother.